get into it, Mr. Derrick Ampy.
All right.
We've had like a number of conversations over the last, really, we started this conversation about a month ago. I feel like it's about a month ago. When ChatGPT was first making the news, and now you have all these AI programs that are out there. And, we've gone back and forth about how AI is going to change the landscape of our lives. But, of course, being an entrepreneur, myself and you are as well. What does that mean, though, for those of us who are aware, those of us who are entrepreneurs, and how we can really leverage the opportunity to use this technology to our benefit, as opposed to kind of have a situation where these doomsday predictions, though I think there's a lot of truth to it, we don't necessarily all need to participate in it, right? So, of course, I'm going to defer to you. You're the IT guy. You're the person I go to. But I want to get some perspective on topics like this. I'm interested to hear, like, off top, like, what are some of your perspectives in terms of what these technologies mean moving forward for those of us who are in the entrepreneur space?
Fair enough. I think, before I go into that, let's take a step back and talk about a concept that a topic we talked about before that's related to this, and that is this notion of the seismic changes that we're seeing right now in the environments around us, particularly around tech. The human history has gone through different stages of industrial revolutions over the years and over our history. And we've talked about this, right? How we've gone from non-written word or verbal word communication to the printing press and the innovation that happened as a result of that, to going from horse and buggy to going to automobile, and then the seismic changes that happened as a result of that, to the advent of the semiconductor and transmit and computer components, and the ability of being able to start to build computers and such. That changed the world. And now we're seeing AI, machine learning, and technologies like that have a seismic effect on the way that our world is working. And one of the things you mentioned before and in our previous discussions is how more frequently these seismic changes are occurring, and how quickly that is forcing us to react. And they are happening more frequently now. That is the nature of our culture, and our civilization is advancing to a rate now where we've hit the inflection curve, where our growth was kind of steady, it's going up, and now we finally hit that elbow where we're going to shoot up, in terms of the frequency in which we see these seismic changes. So the ChatGPT is just the beginning. It's the first wave of the next generation of these AI-based technologies and other technologies that are going to change the way that we do business and live our lives. They're going to come in our lives more frequently. And they're also going to, as you mentioned before, previously, whenever there were these large seismic changes in technology, we had a whole generation to be able to react to it, right? When the automobile came about, we had a whole generation to be able to react, start to create new industries around automobile manufacturing. People was moved to different areas of the country to, accordingly, so on and so forth. But now, with the combination of us being a worldwide connected culture and the fact that we have technologies coming faster, we're not going to have as much time to react. And so there's going to be a bit of pressure on entrepreneurs in particular, which are typically the early adopters of technology, to keep abreast of what's coming out, have a certain kind of discretion about when to invest in certain technologies and when not. Not all new technologies are going to be really going to be here for the long term. A lot of these things are going to be fads. I think, for instance, like avatars, as we started to see them before, where you basically take a photo of yourself and you generate, avatars of yourself. That may that's probably going to be a fad, but kind of the long-reaching ideas of creating a digital representation of oneself and a digital identity, and having that identity be able to collaborate with other identities out there in a metaverse, that is more likely a lasting idea that's going to be pervasive, no matter how it manifests itself today and tomorrow. So for entrepreneurs, the pressure's on to keep abreast, have a certain level of discretion about technologies, when to use them and when not to. And then it's about learning how to have kind of a experimenter's kind of mindset where, there's no manual to say how you should use this technology to achieve your goals. This is where innovation comes into play. Each entrepreneur is going to have to find unique ways of looking at this technology, evaluating its efficacy and what it can do for their business, and actually then apply it to their particular industries involved. And it's for individuals like me to provide more guidance along that path.
Yeah. And, I want to put a little bit of perspective, a little context in it, right? Because covered a lot in a short amount of time, which we always do. But for individuals listening who are like, okay, so what the hell are they talking about, right? What we're really talking about is how we went from an agricultural space to a manufacturing space. And really, for all intents and purposes, we had like a couple generations to make that transition. And it was still ugly. It was still messy. It was still savage inequality. It was still individuals who were slow to make the transition, or quite frankly, just hadn't adapted to going from an agricultural environment, time clock way of life, to all of a sudden moving into a city, right? I remember reading a book a number of years ago where it talked about the evolution of Detroit and how, things we take for granted today, like running water, sewage, garbage pickup, et cetera, how those things were at the outset non-existent, like it was squalor. A lot of people struggled to make that transition, but nevertheless, we had a couple generations, right? And then we make this transition from manufacturing to industrial, where now people are not operating within their neighborhoods and communities anymore. They're like commuting to a factory and they're spending 8, 12, 14, 16, some of these places 18 hours, right? Because we didn't have unionization at the time. We didn't have safety protocols. We didn't have any of these things, right? So it was kind of like coming here and get down or lay down. But still, I would argue you had a couple generations, right, for people to kind of figure it out, right? Whether or not they're going to be white collar, blue collar, that kind of dichotomy of labor, and what that meant for people and the lifestyles that they lived and the dynamics their families faced. And then now, you had this transition where, quite frankly, I felt like we went from industrial to service overnight in the blink of an eye. And that wasn't nearly as fast as it was transpiring. Like I remember in 2000, well, I'll go back even further. I remember in 95 when Facebook was just becoming a thing. Like we were still utilizing all these different softwares. What was it? Gosh, man, what was that portal that everybody was on? And I thought it was like amazing.
American Online back in the day, back in 95.
Yeah.
American Online was big. Yahoo was still big. Netscape was the browser of choice back then in the day.
Yeah. It was a social media channel though that everybody was on.
Back then, internet related
about when Napster came out.
And Napster came out around 2000, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible, man. I cannot remember the name of that platform. Anyway, like I remember utilizing those platforms and I had no idea, like I don't think most people did, that there was going to be a commercial aspect to it, right? You can utilize it to build your business. And then it seemed like we fast forward 5, 7 years later and it's like, if you didn't have a social media presence, I mean, today is kind of like if you don't have, it was kind of like if you didn't have signage for your business, right? You're on a major boulevard downtown, you didn't have signage, people couldn't find you. You have best product, best service, gone were the days where if you build it, people will come. No, social media changed that. Like you had to show up. And now, I hate to sound a red alarm about this. I don't want to be on the alarming side of the table, but we talked about this, that McDonald's just opened up in Texas, Manless, right? We see what's going on in the transportation logistics industry. We see what's been going on in the factories for the longest. Now we see what's going on in these warehouses where you're having entire populations of people being obsoleted. And they don't have the time to make the adjustment. This is happening in real time. Like they're being let go. And the job that they would normally pursue or that would be available to the marketplace is just like missing.
It's evaporated.
Right? Yeah, evaporated. And then, of course, the other concern I have is I remember the first appointment I ran, kind of sort of post-epidemic, right? Where I'm walking, I get out my car, walk into a household, and I think I shared before how I'm looking up and down the street and I see all these kids everywhere. Well, it's peculiar because my kids are homeschooled, so they're not out on the street, they're in front of a computer, in front of the iPad, laptops, getting in with their teachers and whatnot. So I'm running this appointment. I walk into the household, I look down the street, I see all these kids out and about. I walk into the residence and I try to pull out my laptop to give the presentation and I couldn't get access online. I'm like, you all don't have Comcast? Like you all don't have AT&T? Yeah, we have it, we don't have access to it. I'm like, this is a real internet desert. Like I'm accustomed to driving through areas, particularly rural areas, and you lose internet. But to be in a major metropolitan area, and that's how I regard Detroit metro area, it's still a major city, And to learn that there are blocks and blocks and blocks, and then to know what's happening, like how AI is even changing my life as an entrepreneur now. These individuals are already like light years behind. Like, I almost feel like they are on some type of agricultural plane in some some universe somewhere elsewhere. And what that's going to mean for entrepreneurs, particularly those who just are completely unaware of these dynamics that are transpiring right now. Like, I firmly believe if you're an entrepreneur and you don't get familiar with this AI technology for the next 2-3 years, it's going to feel like you're 20 years behind.
It could very well be that way. I guess it really kind of depends on how the AI technologies kind of evolve over time. It's interesting because, the Wi-Fi example, for instance, was that a situation where the Wi-Fi networks weren't actually available, or that they were available, but they weren't accessible by the citizens? Is there a distinction?
I'll drive through certain neighborhoods now.
Yeah.
And there are spaces where Wi-Fi is not available.
There's no Wi-Fi network.
No Wi-Fi.
Interesting. So
like,
it could
your
be
phone goes, you'll interpret it how it'll land, how it lands with you. But from a lay person, I'm driving into a space and there's no signal on my phone. And it's not
no cellular signal at all.
No cellular signal. Like, things just go dead. It's like dead zone.
Yeah.
And then there are areas where I do have access to my cell phone, but I'm driving through these areas, and if I didn't have a mobile hotspot, those families would not have access to the internet. Or if they are paying for the internet, the signal is so weak. It's so minuscule, if you will, that it doesn't do any good. They can't watch television. They can't get on a computer. They can't even search stuff on their phones themselves.
Okay, so I get it now. So dead spots are one problem, and it's surprising how many metropolitan areas across the United States in particular have those dead spots. I saw there was one major one in DC, and you would think that DC is actually in the middle of what is called Data Center Alley, where there's more data centers in that area than it's the backbone of the internet. It literally powers the internet. More internet traffic goes to that area than any other place in the world. And so it's odd to have that much technological advancement and at the same time not even have reliable cellular connectivity. So it's an issue. I like to believe that it's because we're continuing our transition to 5G holistically across the board. And what's happening is that as these cellular companies are kind of going through, they're actually starting to kind of take down the 4G towers and bring up the 5G towers. That's what I would like to believe. But the reality is the priority of which areas they target is going to be demographic based. And I think there is an element to that, right? And then the other part of it is that even if you have reliable cellular connectivity, that doesn't mean that the internet there is free. There are internet service providers that provide free, open, available Wi-Fi, but it's not a universal right. It's not like a universal utility that anybody has access to. And if you even have access to it, it might be spotty, it may be unreliable, it may be slow, it may be rate limited so that you only can get so much bandwidth. All those problems happen. And basically it gets down to the real reality of the problem is the internet is now an essential need for every citizen. And right now, it still is not universally accessible to everyone. And what you're describing is basically a phenomenon that over time, that absence of that critical resource in people's lives is going to make a huge difference between whether or not they're part of the haves or part of the have-nots. And so it is an issue. It's a major issue.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked at the stats recently. I just haven't had the bandwidth to look at it. I don't want to get pressed. But, when you learn and you hear about how many children are left behind, like how many children had their education literally stunted for the last year to 2, maybe even 3 years, right? And I'm sitting back thinking about it now. I think about my children. They're, for all intents and purposes, they're a good 2 years advanced beyond their peers. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that simple access to internet, right? Being able to make sure they had access to programs, being able to make sure they were able to interface their teachers, even in terms of the due diligence I did and making sure I was finding tools and resources they could use online to make sure that they were competitive. right? And that they didn't miss a beat. And to realize that just like you had families that were moving forward, I mean, you can't even say they were standing still. Like they literally lost 2-3 years. I mean, that's insane. I mean, the inability to acquire a job, right? Actually go online and apply for a job was impacted there. And so, I mean, we're not even talking about AI. We're just talking about status quo today. And then you add AI to the picture, right? I mean, I think I was sharing with you the other day how.
Think about it this way: AI, all these AI services are made accessible through the internet, right? ChatGPT is a web application that you go to a browser in order to have a consultation with the AI. So if you don't have internet connectivity, you don't have the opportunity to even learn about that tool, leverage it in any capacity. So yeah, that fundamental resource it's a gate. If you don't have access to, if you can't get through that gate, you can't get through it. Any of the technological advances that are coming through as a result.
Yeah. I mean, I think I shared with you before how I was blown away by using ChatGPT, just like 2 other devices I use.
Yeah.
I may look it up in my phone while we're talking. So I'm not just speaking in a vacuum, but there are 2 tools I was telling you about how normally I'll have these conversations, save it on my phone, find some type of older program to transcribe it, wait for 2-3 hours for that to happen. And then I got to change the grammar, tone, all this other fun stuff. And how I found this tool where literally in less than 15 minutes, download my video, transcript grammatically correct, right? All I had to do was change some verbiage for tone, add my quote unquote human touch to it so it resonate within the audience I wanted to resonate with. But I know very soon that's not going to be necessary, right? And how normally something that would take me literally 5 days, it would take me 5 days to put an article out online that I felt comfortable with. And even still, I wouldn't be satisfied. It wouldn't be to a satisfactory level. It's like, I got to hurry up and get this out. I got to get the content out, right? And to know that I accomplished 5 days of work in really 3-4 hours.
Sure.
Right. And that's just like a micro example of how these technologies can change the game, right? How people are able to create graphic design and covers and now commercials that I foresee are going to be introduced real soon. I was listening to some article, I can't remember if it was NPR or maybe PBS, of how now teachers are having to invest in technology because these kids are going online and literally asking these AI programs to write the paper, and they're getting a accurate, bona fide piece of work that can pass the test on college exams, right? And I just think about this application once again to entrepreneurs, right? We had this conversation, right, about how I believe it's going to help entrepreneurs. What a process that would normally take 6 to 9 months, traditionally speaking, right? So you ideate, you come out with a business idea, work up the courage, and then you start taking your ideal to the marketplace, right? So what that means for most entrepreneurs is, okay, you create some content. So whether it be LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, any of these platforms, and you beta test. You want to see how the audience is going to respond. And then, I'm a firm believer that unless you touch 1,000 people, you're really not beta testing. You really don't know whether or not your product or service is going to gain traction. You can get a nice fuzzy warm feeling by touching 30 or 50 or 100 people, but you really don't know whether or not your product or service is really beta tested until at least 1,000 people have had a chance to give you feedback, whether that's a like, comment, dislike. I don't want to be your friend anymore. This sucks, right? Whatever the case may be. And then you take that data and then you begin to formulate more content, right? So messaging, if you're really advanced, you start thinking strategically about your buyer persona and what colors, images, what types of thumbnails you're going to use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then once you get that process figured out and you start taking on clients with more regularity, then you pour gas on it. And there's a variety of other things you can do. But usually for most business owners, that's a process. That's usually a 6-9 month process, right? And I'm sitting back looking at this technology, and I'm not a guru, as you know. I use it. I don't understand it, right? Or I don't understand it nearly to the level that you would. But I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, so now I can ideate. Okay, take that process. And then I can say, okay, I want to put this out in the marketplace and see what the response is. And I can utilize this AI technology, number one, to help me distribute it quicker and more efficiently. I can ask the AI technology, okay, based on this subject matter, based on my product or service, what tool or what do you think, which is what I did a couple of days ago, right? What mediums would be most apropos or effective to disseminate my information to get my feedback faster? So instead of taking 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, if you're not good at social media, hell, it may take you 6 months before you even get 100, 200 people interacting with you. So I can take this technology, and if deployed correctly, I can touch 1,000 people in 1, 2, 3 weeks, right? And then on top of that, the data, the content I'm putting out there has already been curated in such a way to maximize my chances of success. So I can collect all that data, all that feedback, all the information, and I could really reasonably step on the pedal in 2 months and have a business that's growing, building a marketplace, a community of people who are interested, and really have a successful launch. And I'm just thinking about the application of that, right? If I decided I want to start up a different type of business, how I could literally crush the competition who either doesn't have access to the internet, or they're not even thinking about, or none of this conversation is percolating, right? And as an entrepreneur, the competitor in me is like, yes, opportunity. But I also understand that the best way to make sure an entrepreneur has a healthy business is to have a healthy community, right? And we know there are communities that, like this conversation is heady for them, right? It's for me, it's interesting to see like how all this is going to evolve.
Fair enough. And I think one of the reasons why it's so heady is because we're talk about so many different aspects of this problem all at the same time. It's kind of hard for someone to kind of understand all of it all at once. Maybe unpacking it will help. So I think what I heard what you say was kind of 3 very fundamental, important aspects of why this technology is starting to become popular today. One is because of the operational efficiencies that it offers. Being able to streamline a process that used to take you weeks and turn it into hours is one of the fundamental ways in which technology innovates and changes our lives. Every single technological advancement basically is built around this premise of take something that takes this long and make it this long. Take something that's this expensive and make it this expensive. All technology advancements are like that. AI is no different. The funny thing about it is that we've also, as a community and as a society, have got to a place where we're starting to trust AI more. That's kind of the amusing thing. AI is not new. AI has been around since for God's sake. It really has. The only reason why AI is popular today is because our hardware infrastructure, the machines that actually run the AI algorithms to train models and the systems that make it accessible to you via the internet, they have gotten to a place of sophistication where now, one, they're accessible to everybody via the internet, right? Cloud computing changed the way in which we work with computers. You know, you may have a small laptop in your home right now, but you don't have a clunky desktop anymore, right? It's because now in fact, more and more people are using their phones almost exclusively to do their business. And it's all because the technology is now in the cloud, which has now made it accessible to everyone. Or everyone with an internet connection. So it's really those kind of advancements that have cumulatively made AI now something tractable for us to use. But the funny thing about it is over time, historically, we didn't trust AI. Like, AI was used in the medical field, for instance, for a long time. And the FDA, for instance, was like, we don't know if we can trust a model that says, hey, maybe you should give this cancer treatment to this patient because we don't understand how the model works. That's kind of the funny thing about it, too, is that most people don't even understand how the algorithms even work, but they implicitly trust the outcomes coming out of it. It's gotten to a point where it looks good enough for it to kind of get past your initial kind of bias test. And so it's interesting. That's fascinating that we're now gotten to a point where we're trusting it more. Over time, I think we will evolve to a place where we can learn when to trust AI and when not to. And I think entrepreneurs are going to lead the way along that way. And I think it's through those experiences where they're experimenting with their clientele that they actually start to get to what is how accurate or how usable AI will become. And then the third aspect, excuse me, it's just, this is a really fascinating topic. I'm almost losing my train of thought. I lost my train of thought, man. Let's just keep going. I'll come back to it. It'll come to me in a second. Give me a quick second.
Some of the verbiage you use is like triggers for me, right? Because I remember we had this conversation 2 weeks ago, and about to take conversation a different way, right? You talk about bias, right? And I was thinking about that, right? So the individuals who are doing the programming or laying the framework for AI to operate. Well, right now, AI is only as effective as the inputs, right?
It's as effective as the data given to train it.
Right.
So an AI developer doesn't develop the algorithm, it feeds it the data and it configures the algorithm. That's how it works.
And so for the individuals who are involved in curating that process, that means their biases are also becoming part of the DNA.
Yes.
Right.
So let's take a real example of that.
Yeah.
There are AI algorithms used today to actually help judges make a determination of innocence or guilt of a suspect, of a person in court, right?
Right.
And it's used for determining whether or not they are guilty or innocent, and it also can be used to actually dictate things like sentencing. And the problem is that, there's a whole book on this topic. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction. And I love that book because it talks about how if you're taking police and crime data, but you're taking it in disproportionately from Black and brown communities, then these algorithms are going to be intrinsically biased because of that. And the argument is often made, well, the crime is happening here, therefore the data is here. But we all know that the crime is not just happening in those communities. Crime is happening all around. It's just that the data is only being collected, sometimes selectively, sometimes by happenstance in very specific areas. And unfortunately, we lose track of how that data is captured and those biases therein and how that affects the algorithms. It's all called, the concept in data science and data is called provenance. It's basically the lineage of where that data came from and all the different transformations it went through in order to get to that algorithm. Companies to this day, and I've worked in tech now for 25 years, and I've been doing AI for almost that long. Companies, even to this day, even the big internet companies still struggle with provenance, still struggle with trust. It's a big problem, and it's not only going to affect small business owners, it also affects the large business owners as well, the large corporations as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, once again, application, right? And how I can imagine from my limited purview, even still the impacts, like what it's going to be, right? So I was listening to, I think it was Congressman Jeffries today, a video of him going back and forth with a colonel or a captain, police force. And, they were having a conversation about Black on Black crime, right?
Yep.
How Black on Black crime is such a major issue. Yep. And then the congressman kind of rebuttals and says, well, you do know 83% of crimes committed against white Americans are committed by white Americans. Where's the talk about white on white crime? Why is that not an issue? Because proportionally speaking, it's not like African Americans commit crimes disproportionately at a disproportionate level to our other ethnic groups, right? But if you have individuals who are programming that into security, right? We have programmers who are program their bias into it. So I have a product or a service, the algorithm picks it up and says, well, I think only this segment of the population would be interested in it, as opposed to another, based on all these algorithms, right? It's like, I can imagine a situation where it's creating winners and losers. Like literally doing that, creating winners and losers, right? And there's some trickery that as an entrepreneur you can play today, right? If I want to appeal to a broader community, I can hire someone to be my face. I can use graphics, I can curate my online presence in such a way where I am innocuous in terms of my ethnicity or background, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But you're not going to be able to perform that type of trickery, or you're not going to be able to finesse AI in that way. You're just not going to be able to do it, right? All the data that's available out there about us as individuals that we've kind of freely given away haphazardly without realizing what the impact will be, right? I think about that as an entrepreneur, and I'm not quite sure to what extent it's going to show up today, but I got to imagine it's going to show up pretty quickly. Like, it's not going to be a situation where people have a generation. Hell, you're not going to even have a period of ideation, like 3-5 years. You're not going to have that. Like, these changes are here and now, like they're coming swift.
Sure.
Right. So I think about that. And then I also think about the fact that why AI is being beta tested is accessible. Because I really see this, or at least this evolution of AI is being beta tested. I know ChatGPT, what's this program I'm looking at now? Alphonic Productions. The other one I've been using, which has been really, really helpful, is Otter.ai. There's another logo AI where you can literally tell it, I want a logo to produce this type of effect. So now it removes me from the equations. I'm not good at logos. So tonight I'm gonna do a deep dive into it. I'm gonna play around and say, hey, I want a logo that does this. I want a logo that'll be attracted to this demographic. I want a logo that's gonna help me do this, right? I'm gonna see how effective this is, right? But I almost lost my train of thought just getting excited about the technology I'm gonna use tonight.
Well, let me piggyback off of that, because it kind of gets
Yeah.
back to what you were saying, talking about earlier. So one of the things that we have to remember when it comes to AI, and we use the word algorithm a lot, but I'm going to unpack that a little bit further. At the end of the day, any algorithm is powered by what is referred to as a model, a predictive model oftentimes. And the difference, there's different algorithms that are used to create different kind of models. Like a neural network model is different from a reinforcement learning model, which is different from a sport veteran machine model. And I don't expect you to know what any of those things mean. But the point is that each of those different models are an approximation of the data that's provided to it. So I say that because we got to remember that the models, these algorithms, are only as good as the data given to it. And so if you give it data, or you ask it a question that it has not previously, captured data on, its predictive accuracy will be dramatically lower than it would be you're asking if questions that it has seen these answers before, or a larger population of people have asked those kind of questions before. And so it's still possible to game a given algorithm. You remember, like, keep that in mind. You can still game these things. It's not that when you actually know what you're doing when it comes to these models and how they work. And so because of that, what I would suggest, particularly for entrepreneurs, but even for large businesses that I work with, is that you actually, when you're creating a strategy around AI, you don't bet the farm on any one algorithm or any one model. What you actually do is you take a more of an experimentation mentality, where it's not just you're evaluating different market segments that you're trying to reach out to. And I'll talk about how you use AI to do that in a moment. But what you also are doing is you're using different models, different algorithms, different parameters to those algorithms, in order for you to see, maybe this model actually gives you a better result for this market segment, but this model happens to be better calibrated for this market segment. And so when you're actually trying to decide which one to use, instead of just relying on one, you can actually ask multiple of them. And then basically you have a tiebreaker, right? You have some sort of process where you actually take the results of each one of these algorithms, and then you decide which one you want to go with moving forward. Entrepreneurs are going to get to the point where they're going to have to do that kind of work. I know that sounds impossible. There's a lot of work to it. But again, it simply is because there's no one size fit all model or algorithm out there. And what we're going to see is, as AI becomes more pervasive in our society, you're going to see a lot of models. There's going to be tons of them out here. There's going to be a whole marketplace.
So there's going to be some democratization of it, because
yes,
different models are going to be more effective than others, right?
For different things. Yes.
And so, okay, so for me, before this conversation, I was like looking at AI as one big like block, right? But now you've broken it down in this way. I can understand that. No, okay. So the different models, the platforms that these models operate on, is not going to be one size fits all. They're not going to operate as effective with the same degree of effectiveness. So there's going to be a period of time where those of us who are willing to do the research, beta test the models themselves, to figure out which ones serve our interests. There's going to be a period where we're doing that too, right?
There's going to be a period of that. What I believe is going to end up being developed at some point is a formalized experimentation platform. So what you were describing earlier, where, okay, as an entrepreneur, I have a new product or a new service that I'm conceptualizing, and I need to determine which target market I want to actually send that off to and see how effective that my marketing is going to be, for instance. And so one way to approach that would be, okay, I'm going to make this product or service. I'm going to market it this one way. I'm going to go ahead and do a campaign to that whole market, and I'm going to see the reaction. I'm going to collect how many clicks they give me, how many likes, blah, blah, blah. Most companies do something, a variance of that, but what they do is they actually did say, I'm actually going to cut up my market. So let's say my market consists of 1 million people. Let's say I have 5 different ideas of how I can market to this one market segment. Instead of saying, I'm going to do a campaign, in first month for this, for the entire market, and then the next month do another campaign with a different algorithm for that same market, blah, blah, blah. What you could do is have one campaign, but you cut up the market into, 5 units. And then for each of those subunits, you market differently for each one to see how they react. Because you're taking advantage of the statistics, right? So if you have a big enough market, then you have, if 250,000 people react a very specific, or 200,000 people react a very specific way, you can take that knowledge and say, hey, this model works most effectively here. Maybe I should invest further into this marketing strategy. So it's instead of doing, we used to do experimentation like one after the other. Now we're actually saying we're going to do multiple experiments all at the same time by cutting up my market segment and marketing to these subsets. And that's actually happening in a lot of these internet companies, like Netflix does this right now. The problem, though, is that they had to build their whole platforms to do this automation, because it's just a lot of coordination that has to happen. What I think is going to happen for the small business market is I can see a lighter weight experimentation platform be developed that streamlines the process of creating these campaigns around AI. So instead of you having to understand which algorithms I'm going to use, how to parameterize it, blah, 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 you can provide some higher order kind of concepts. And it creates these, different parameters. It generates the different models. It then, carves out your market segment into these smaller groups and actually sends, various, marketing, campaigns to each one accordingly. And all you do is keep track of the results. How well did the people react to the marketing attempt, or whatever attempt that you reached out to them regarding?
And at the same time, the model is also getting smarter.
Yes.
Are you utilizing it? You're getting increasingly more effective results because it's learning as you're utilizing it as well.
That is correct. There are some models and some algorithms that have the ability to incrementally learn. So as you get more feedback, that information can go back to the model and it can get smarter. Yes.
Now, the other thing I'm thinking about is expense. Like, I know at this stage, because they're beta testing, like they're literally beta tests on the marketplace, us, to see, the percentage of us that become early adapters, start utilizing, engaging, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my biggest concerns as well is that at some point, this stuff is not going to be as successful as it is today to the average Joe. It's not going to be free anymore. And as these models become more effective, as these models become more refined, and then you have a class of individuals that develop around it that specialize in utilizing it, it's going to price a lot of people out of it at some point in time too, which is why I was so gung-ho about having this conversation, because we need more business owners to become familiar with this technology and understand it before there's a price tag attached to it, and a premium price tag attached to it.
Absolutely. It is very much kind of at an early stage in terms of its adoption and in terms of its general availability and accessibility. And you're right. There will be a point where, as these services become more advanced, they will start to come at a charge. There will be some sort of pricing model around them. And that's just the nature of business, right? You have to have revenue in order to be able to finance the continual evolution of those products and services. It's no different for it is for any other kind of service. What I would suggest to some of our business owners is, one, to understand the basic concepts around AI and machine learning, so they understand what it can do and what it can't do. Start playing around with it now to understand, kind of start to figure out innovative ways in which they can actually leverage the technology to just simplify very small aspects of the business. I always look for, take the thing that takes 80% of your time, and then see how AI can streamline that one process. The more you can streamline that 80% process, the more your overall life experience as an entrepreneur is going to be improved, because you're not going to spend so much time doing that one activity that is taking so much of your time bandwidth now. So, find a use case, start experimenting with AI, and see what you can do with it. Not all experiments are going to work out well. Sometimes you're going to be like, hey, this thing is crap, but then they're going to say, well, you know what? For this particular use case, for creating a simple piece of copyrighted material in order to put on a social media post, this is actually pretty effective for me to do it. I don't have to necessarily alter this by hand anymore. Or the AI can generate something enough for me to get started with that actually makes it easier for me to I can go into editing mode instead of going into altering mode. That can be a huge, streamlined process to actually increase some efficiency. So just start with something simple and kind of go from there. And the funny thing about it was that the AI technologies are still actually very much open source. So if you're really enterprising, there's no reason why you can't learn the technologies themselves and build your own services. The truth is, a lot of these tools that are coming out now that, basically take, like I think you mentioned at the very beginning, I have an app that basically generates, a transcript, and then that transcript gets converted into audio, and then it also gets converted into video. Right now, you probably have to take the output of one, import it into the other, then take the output of that one and import it into the other one. Well, eventually you'll see automation where you just do one and it goes to all of them. And it's just because someone has taken those exact same open source technologies and just created a wrapper that makes it easier for you to actually interact with it. Any enterprising entrepreneur can do that.
Right. Now, so many different directions to go with this, but you said something about open source. So I immediately start thinking, okay, this technology is still the quote unquote average Joe, so to speak, like reasonable intelligence, reasonable education, can really position themselves to be a programmer, a curator, someone that actually helps to create these models that AI is being built upon. It's still accessible to people.
It is very much so. Yes.
Yeah. I know that's a huge part of what you're taking aim at, is actually being one of those individuals that kind of serves as a conduit, so individuals can actually learn this technology and be part of the process, as opposed to just on the outside looking in and just being users of it and consumers of it.
Absolutely. AI and machine learning is just an example of this, but I think all technology is incredibly important for people to start to get up to speed with in order to be able to be competitive. There was a time where you didn't have to know about tech in order to be successful in business. Now it's non-negotiable. You can't be successful if you don't understand how mobile and web technologies work. You can't be successful if you don't understand how e-commerce works. You just can't. Like, these are the ways in which we interact with our customers. These are the ways in which we actually draw value, provide value to our customers, and extract value back from them. And so AI is just part and parcel into that.
Now, like I said, man, there's so many different directions we can go with this, right? And of course, I start thinking about, and once again, I don't want to be an alarmist, but I started thinking about conversation we had a couple of days ago, right? So right now, if somebody wants to go to my blog and try to duplicate my content, knock yourself out. Because the reality of the matter is, you're going to lack my tone. You can't bring my experience to the table. The new broom may sweep better, but the old broom knows the corners, right? Okay. So you can try to plagiarize whatever content you want to try to do, whatever you want to do. But what I'm thinking about is how as AI evolves and becomes more effective, right? It could be a situation where I could literally see your content, see your information, see your voice, inflection, audio, video, all that fun stuff. And I could literally take you using AI and duplicate you to promote my products and services, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think about that, in terms of how exciting it is that that type of technology I know is literally right around the corner, if not right now available, and I'm just not aware of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem's going to pose. Like I remember you talking about how Elon Musk was sounding alarm about how we're going to need laws, regulations, like we're going to need guardrails. Because right now, this for individuals who are ahead of the curve, a lot of damage can be done.
Yeah.
Right. You can literally usurp other people's values, promote it, derive compensation for it, and completely cut them out.
Yep. Plagiarism and kind of the advancement of deep fakes is going to be interesting. When you can actually masquerade as someone else using AI and actually basically capture a market as a result by masquerading as someone else. It's funny that we talk about it as if it doesn't exist now, but it actually already exists. It's just in the United States, it's been kind of slow to kind of get into heavy adoption, but the technology has existed for some time now. It has, amongst other things, it has forced us to talk about what is now referred to as ethical AI. And that is basically now taking a look at what AI can do for us as a civilization, but at the same time realizing that there needs to be some sort of guardrails around how it's applied, when is it applied, and basically how is it leveraged ultimately. And you're right, Elon has been pushing for this for quite some time because he has observed that as AIs become more advanced, and the scary thought is as AIs become eventually sentient and self-aware, at some point it's going to be very dangerous, having these, without having rules, to enforce exactly how these AI systems are manufactured, maintained, and developed.
Yeah, because earlier we were talking about how you can quote unquote still game AI. But the moment AI becomes sentient, it can game us.
Yes. And it can be programmed to not feel bad about it.
Right.
That's the biggest problem. Like this is what's been discussed lately these days. Like if AI was to get to a place, and I don't want to be too much of a conspiracy theorist or alarmist either, but there is some that think that AI can get to a place where what is not only sentient and self-aware, but also can, let's say it decides, okay, if it's trying to optimize the carbon emissions across the planet, for instance, right? A very noble goal that we might want to throw as a problem to an AI at some point in time. But what happens if the AI says, you know what, the solution to solving the carbon emissions problem is to kill all the humans. That fix it. And so it's like, without any kind of rules or guardrails or whatever, something that is completely, we don't always know exactly how the AI is going to rationalize its conclusions. And so it may come up with an idea that is completely logically valid, but ethically really, really bad. And we're not necessarily teaching AI ethics. And that's the problem, right? There's literally no guardrails. And in fact, the laws, China has probably been the biggest kind of advancer of AI technology for the last few decades. And even they are relaxing their laws now in order to stimulate the economy. And so, some of the rules that we actually use to kind of hold AI in are now being relaxed in the goal of capitalism. And so you're already going to see, AI be used in more ways that we even imagined before. And the United States has a different problem because their approach to legislation, particularly around tech, has always been a reaction. So They wait for something to happen, and then they go, holy crap, we need to now fix this. Like, data security is a real problem. Therefore, now let's come up with all these laws that provide data protections and such that we react to. And they're oftentimes heavyweight and don't really solve the problem. We're going to see something like that with AI. We're going to see an incident occur. Next thing you know, you're going to see a bunch of legislation to try to fix it. It's not going to fix it. And we're going to go through waves of reacting to bigger problems.
Yeah, and that's the thing where I start having a little bit of consternation, right? There's one part of me is excited about it. I'm gonna leverage this, take advantage of it, learn what I need to learn, right? I mean, I think about when Google was introduced, right? And I remember sitting in my office, and it's one of the biggest errors in judgment I've ever made, right? Because Google being introduced and being accepted on a mass scale followed the dot-com bust. So I was already skeptical about technology, AI, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of its viability for the average everyday Joe to take advantage of it and enjoy a financial windfall, right, or benefit. And I remember sitting in the office when Google's IPO was introduced. And I remember watching it go from like, yeah, you already know where I'm going. Like it accelerated at an absurd pace, like in a day. Like I remember waking up the following day and it was like 1,000% increase in the stock, you know. It was just absurd, right? And then I think about how swiftly that technology changed our lives. And we talk about legislation and the people who have their hands on the steering wheel in terms of legislation and laws. I mean, hell, they don't even. I mean, when I look at C-SPAN, it's scary because a lot of individuals are so busy demonizing the Elon Musk of the world. It's like you do understand he is like because the next Elon Musk may not have humanitarian bone in the body.
Very much true. Very true.
The next one may not have humanitarian bone in their body. At least he's saying, look, hate me or like me, you need to take these things into consideration. And for me, it's amazing to see that people still aren't taking it into consideration what he's talking about, like some of the dangers of this, right? And because, like you said before, it's going to happen so swiftly. Like, I really firmly believe that what we saw at McDonald's in Texas, 2-3 years, it might even take that long, depending on how aggressive they want to be, right?
Do you remember when the fast food chains did their remodeling like a few years back?
Yeah,
maybe 10 years ago. I remember when I first saw like the first Burger King and Wendy's got revamped, and I was amazed by how quickly all the other ones got updated. I mean, it felt like it was like in the course of less than a year, literally the entire footprint of all the properties had gotten upgraded. And I was just thinking to myself, like, my God, if these companies are motivated, they can make a sweeping change like that. And so you're right. As soon as I heard about the automated, restaurant, I thought if McDonald's was motivated enough, they could literally target all their major, regional areas and just blast them with upgrade them quickly. I mean, it wouldn't take much.
Yeah, and once again, at some point you stop saying you're being alarmist. I mean, practically speaking, this is going to have swift consequences. Like I remember the argument that people were making when Trump, of course, became president, and he's talking about coal and all these other industries, right? And then for me, it was interesting because it gave me an opportunity to do a deep dive into the industry, and then kind of view that industry metaphorically for other industries, right? I mean, you have people who worked in these mines for generations, and telling them to go out and learn some type of new skill set is like, you understand how the human mind works, how culture works. Like, it wasn't going to happen. You're not going to teach a 50-year-old coal miner of 2 and 3 generations. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying that's a tough challenge. Yeah. And now I'm thinking about how, like, I firmly believe in the next 2 years, Like if somebody were to disappear for the next 2 years, or I mean, let's be real, be practical. Somebody were to go to jail for the next 2-3 years, or go to prison and come out, how dramatically different things would be, right? There's not going to be a job for you to walk into a retail store and batch stuff, or even be a cashier or any of that stuff. Like that stuff's gone. It's a wrap, right? I'm looking at the creative class and what's happening to them. I was talking to a gentleman a couple of days ago, and he was like, right now, I can go to an art gallery and I can spend $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 on a nice piece of art. But practically speaking, if I just want a piece of art to sit in my office, I don't care whether or not it's the original McCoy. I don't care. I just want it to look good, right? And while I would like to believe that AI is not going to be able to create a masterpiece novello of all the emotion and wordplay and creativity, right? Because it's only, like I said, it's only as creative as the inputs, right? So, those types of things, it'd be interesting to see if AI can be applicable in that way, right? But definitely AI can create a facsimile. And if I'm a business owner and I just want to put a nice painting in my space and AI does it for $10, I can buy it versus going out and paying $1,000. Where I think about a lot of other things too, right? In much the same way. Like, how is AI going to impact the entertainment space? How is the space I kind of sort of dovetail and operate in, legal space, right? How is AI going to impact that? Now, you're always going to have people who are like, I don't want to execute. I'm going to pay you to execute. You have knowledge I don't have. But I got to believe it's going to change the legal industry in really fascinating ways. It's going to change engineering in real fascinating ways. Like these occupations that require a high level degree of thought. AI can do that. AI can do
It
that.
can, especially in tech. Obviously, I work in tech, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening with engineers and AI. And there's a lot of reason to be concerned, especially if you're a software developer, because, a lot of people are trying to go into tech because they see the high salaries. It doesn't take very long in tech to make a 6-figure salary at all, really. And, in terms of the amount of effort that you have to put into learning the skills in order to get into tech, it's not that much effort. The problem is that anybody that's worked in tech knows how repetitive and pattern oriented the work actually really is.
Right.
A lot of software is actually is actually very much kind of rinse and repeat kind of logic that gets written on a day-to-day basis. And the truth is, it doesn't take that much for an AI model to be able to generate the exact same boilerplate better or at least as good as a human developer can. And so, I would not be surprised to see initially we'll start seeing more and more workforces be supplemented with AI in order to be able to, accommodate the fact that they don't have as much human resources, human capital to help out. But then the game is on from there. How much of those jobs are going to eventually be fully replaced by automation, robot-based automation and AI versus human developers?
I mean, I'm thinking about it, I guess, outside the tech space too. It's like, so you have, I guess the equivalent will be middle management at Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Not the individuals who are in the factory, but middle management, where their responsibility is to look at optimization and utilize certain formulas to optimize production.
Yes.
Right. And reduce errors and reduce operational lag.
Yep.
Those jobs are gone. Those $150,000 and $200,000 a year jobs are on the chopping block, right?
Those jobs will be on the chopping block. What will be interesting is to see how many supervisory roles get introduced, because AI right now still can't do it all by itself. You still need human operators to guide and direct it. So you'll still have those roles, but it's a significant subset of the larger population that you have right now. Yeah.
Right. And you also said something else was a trigger, because I can quickly see a situation where there's not a question of whether or not we have the available talent. Why pay for it? When there's a much, much less expensive alternative to it. Right? I mean, man, I mean, the amount of displacement that is going to transpire over the next 3 to 5 years. So I think people really do believe it's only going to impact, okay, folks who are working in hospitality industry and stuff like that. And it's like, no.
Every industry.
This is going to touch every industry, and it's going to reach, if not the C-suite just underneath the C-suite level, you're going to become expendable.
It's like every organization. So first thing is, and this has been known for quite some time, every organization is basically aspiring to be a tech organization now, because tech is essential for market differentiation, which means that every organization is also going to be touched by AI in some manner or form, irrespective of industry. I know so many C-suite executives that have AI machine learning goals and imperatives already defined in their roadmaps, and that because they realize that they have to have a strategy for it. Right. What's going to happen is that what I tell tech professionals in particular is you have a unique edge because you already have the requisite knowledge to be able to learn how AI works, learn how these algorithms work themselves. So instead of pivoting towards getting into the tech industry and working for an employer, which could then marginalize your job at some point by supplanting you with AI, learn how the technology works to become an entrepreneur, to create your own products and services that now differentiate yourself in the marketplace, and you compete against these other organizations. So
here's a question I have. This is what I think about a lot, right? AI or not, if I onboard someone as part of my sales team, especially with my sales management, in any of the verticals that I'm building, I don't care how much technology is available, it's going to be a process. It's going to take a while, right? Regardless of how effective AI is, in terms of teaching a human being how to win friends and influence people, create credibility, right? Mimic body language, pay attention to posturing, watch how a person uses their hands, their eyes, their feet, their bodies, right? The science of understanding people, which in my mind, that's all sales is. It's just, and to an extent, that's all leadership is, right? It's influence, right? Your capacity to influence. It doesn't matter to me how good a person thinks there is. Average Joe isn't going to become, quote unquote, dangerous or elite unless they're really super hungry. It's going to take a year, 2 years. And for you to really become really elite in this way that I'm speaking of, it's going to take you probably 2-3 years. Right? You can get good, but to become elite, where you start earning elite money and really separate yourself. Yep. So I think about the industry you're in. And I think to myself, well, how easy is it, right? If we were to snap someone hard on their luck, bachelor's degree, right? So reasonable intellect. You matriculated, you got a bachelor's degree from a college. You got some brave ones, brave wave activity going on. And maybe they're hard on their luck, they're working at Sam's Club or Kia or IKEA or whatever, right? And you find that person. Reasonably speaking, how long what's the timeline? If a person takes it seriously, what's the timeline for them to become effective enough to really go out and get a JOB? And then on top of that, also have the skills to at some point transition out that JOB and be able to be a curator in this space?
It really comes down to how motivated the person actually really is to actually put in the work. I mean, it kind of comes down to just that amount of dedication. But right now, the AI technology still require engineering experience. So you would have to learn basic programming if you wanted to kind of get to the ground floor of using AI algorithms kind of at a lowest level. What I'm saying there is if you're trying to create something like a ChatGPT versus actually just using ChatGPT, you would have to learn programming, which is typically like Python these days. That could take somewhere around 6 months. From there, you'd have to learn the basic algorithms and how they work. That takes somewhere between 3 to 6 months as well. So you're looking at about a year's amount of investment from zero to kind of a certain level of proficiency to kind of get started. And then from there, it's just, I would suggest you make an attempt at that point to start to at least play around with the technology, get it under, understand what use cases is appropriate for, determine if there is something for you to actually build upon. You should at least budget a year if you're going to try to go from zero to proficiency and actually be able to leverage these algorithms in a meaningful way.
Now that's one thing. And then you mentioned something earlier about maybe you don't necessarily need to go down that path, but you definitely need to put yourself on a path at the very least of understanding how this technology works so you can employ it effectively.
Right?
So
yeah, if you're taking it more of I like to think of it as like a MBA kind of overview of AI so that you can actually learn how to wield it versus develop it. That's still about 6 months again, because at that point you're not talking about learning how to program and actually how to work with it at that level, but you still need to understand the algorithms themselves, how they work, how to properly give it data, and how to remove biases in the data. So much of AI machine learning is actually related to all the things you do to the data before you give it to the algorithm. The algorithm part is the easiest part of AI. It is literally the easiest part. It is all of the data analysis and manipulation you do to prepare it for the algorithm. That's where all the time is spent. And so, learning the requisite skills to be able to deal with that data analysis and that data manipulation still takes about 6 months. And it's what data analysts and data scientists predominantly do these days.
So what is that process? So for me, I went from being that B2B consultant that was just helping people on a real rudimentary level, right? Get a basic understanding what's the difference between LLC, S Corp, C Corp. Right? How does it impact taxes? How does it impact how people can or will be inclined to invest in you? How things need to be structured, right? It's amazing. There's a lot of B2B people don't even understand that. I'm like, okay. Right. But anyway, we're not going to go there tonight. So I went there. Then it was like, okay, you're a team of me, you exist on paper. And then I spent really 3 to 4 years just consuming as much content, falling back on all the relationships I have with other business owners, all my experiences. And then, of course, making that transition myself, going from a team of me to a team of we. Okay. Right. But I'm looking at my library, 1/6 of it now. It's probably about 10, 15 books I read up there, which put me light years ahead of everybody else. Right. And I'm listening to you, and I'm just thinking about like the seismic shifts that are going to take place over the next couple of years. And the more I hear online, the more I begin to kind of process even what you shared and how it's landed with me. People need to learn this. Yeah. Like now. Yep. So especially if you are an entrepreneur and you've grown from a team of me to a team of we, and now it's time to start. I don't want to call scale because I view scale different, but you want to grow, right? Start putting systems in place, start fine-tuning your marketing, advertising, start better identifying how to get out here in the marketplace and create a competitive advantage, right? Based on the available data that's out there.
Sure.
So the question I would have for you is this. If you were having a conversation with an entrepreneur that was taking this seriously and said, look, over the next 6 to 9 months, I want to get out ahead of this thing, right? I want to be an early adopter. What are some of the endeavors, enterprises, activities, books, spaces, whatever it may be, where would you recommend people concentrate their efforts?
Well, first and foremost, I've seen a growing number of YouTubers starting to talk about AI and machine learning. It's a very hot topic these days.
Yeah.
And there's some very solid content that's coming out, particularly around these latest technologies like ChatGPT. It's so hot that people are compelled to actually create tutorials and such. So, I would start there just because that's kind of the most accessible way of getting initial information about these technologies. From there, I would tell people, do not consider having to go to university in order to be able to get this knowledge. It's just not necessary. There are meetups that are starting to come around these technologies, especially in the major cities. Again, every company is a tech company, which means there's a tech community in every major city that's interested and invested in these technologies and services. So there are many meetups that are starting to come around that are starting to take people with kindred spirits and similar ideas and start to talk about how to leverage these technologies. So find a tribe in your area to start to have these conversations, and you'll be surprised at how many new ideas you'll get just by having conversations just like this with other like-minded entrepreneurs. From there, I think you're going to start seeing more and more AI machine learning oriented boot camps where you can actually make a small capital investment to take a very targeted program in order for you to learn the basics of these technologies as well. And I like boot camps because as opposed to like just online learning, because the boot camps give you kind of a hands-on experience. You have a community to work with. There's an accountability of to kind of keep you motivated and whatnot. And then finally, there are online digital courses around AI and on Coursera, Udemy, and such that are very highly touted. There's a series that came out of Stanford University a number of years back that still to this day is like the biggest AI machine learning courses that are on Coursera. And I'm happy to send you the links to all those things for you.
You said Coursera.
Coursera.
Yeah, we got to put those links in the body. Yeah, in the description. Okay. I wasn't expecting this to go this long. So, but now I realize as I filled up an entire page of notes, we'll probably have like another 2-hour discussion. Ain't gonna have today, but yeah, man, plenty of respect. So what I was taking aim at is here in Detroit metro community, when you talk about private investor and then another level of angel investing, very tight-knit community. If you don't know the right people in those spaces, it doesn't exist. Right? I'm wondering when it comes to finding spaces to have these conversations, to have these discussions, really how accessible are they? And to what extent, I gotta imagine in DC, obviously, right? There's certain spaces where it's been happening, people are having discussions, this is transpiring. But in markets that aren't here yet, or at least is not visible, right, to the average layperson, like how would a person even go about finding a lot of these spaces?
Ironically enough, I would still say that Meetup is a good place to start, because one of the things that happened in tech during COVID is that we used to be very accustomed to getting together in person to have these conversations, but COVID changed all of that. And the tech industry it's always been a very distributed group of people. We don't always live in the same cities. And so a lot of leaders, even to this day, are still remote. So you can still find something, even if it's not necessarily geographically in your city.
There's
So
not
I
an
would
old
still
boys
encourage.
or there's not an old boys or old girls club yet with this because of that distribution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we definitely gonna have a part 2 to this. Yeah, I definitely have a part 2 to this. And I want to do this because you're doing work in this space.
Mhm.
You're literally
Literally
curating
today.
a process and program.
Mhm.
Dude, what are you doing in the space? For people who want to reach out to you, what's your value prop to them? Like, what are some of the things you're working on in this space right now?
In general, my job is to help business and entrepreneurs learn how to leverage technology to have a market impact, right? And AI
Mhm.
machine is one of those technologies. So I help educate people on how these technologies work. What I really do is I really sit down with entrepreneurs and I really take their problems and I show them how technology can be leveraged and capitalized in order to be able to improve either the cost of that process, the operational cost of that process, or the time to market. If you optimize either one of those two forces, that has a huge impact on the top or bottom line of a business. So I focus on basically leveraging tech in order to be able to achieve those outcomes by doing just that. With AI, again, I teach how those algorithms work. I teach how to use these various services like ChatGPT. I go through use cases with them so that I take a very specific problem that they're encountering, and I work with them to actually come up with a solution to that problem so they see it in action. And again, my goal in any time I do a kind of consulting engagement with anybody is that I teach you enough for you to basically do the work yourself. I don't want to constantly be part of the process. I want you to be able to innovate at your own pace because you're going to know your business far more better than I am. You're going to be more invested in seeing it grow. So I want to give you the tools so that you can grow as fast as you want to be able to do so. And then along the way, I just provide those supporting services, those technologies and services that you supplementary need in order to be able to continue operations with AI after you've actually operationalized it. So it's not just, it's not a one and done when you use any of these technologies. You oftentimes, after your product gets to market, you still have to use it over time. So you need someone to help maintain those solutions. And so I maintain the infrastructure for those solutions.
So if people are looking to find you, where are they going to find you?
So they can find me on social media. I'm a Black Man in Tech. I use that handle across all of my different social media platforms, both YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. On LinkedIn, I use my government name, which is Derrick Ampy. So you can reach me there as well.
Cool. I love it. Well, I appreciate you taking time, bro, to have this conversation. Like, this is like long overdue.
Indeed.
I think people go be
I'm looking forward to part 2, man. Let's keep it going.
Yeah.